but I was super into computer graphics pretty early. I started getting into computers when I was 11, and I started reading computer magazines and all that. So, like for an example, there's a computer magazine. I don't remember which specific magazine it was, but I remember I was probably I had to be 11 years old because I mean it just the time period sounds about right. But I was 11 years old and I was sitting in a dentist's office waiting room, and they had this computer magazine that I was reading, and I'm just sitting there salivating over it's like the Dell XPS, Alienware, Voodoo, Falcon Northwest, all these boutique PCs that they would, have ads for in the computer magazines. And, when I was a kid, I would I would go on Falcon Northwest website or whatever, and I would just, pick the configuration of the like highest tier gaming PC, and it'd be like $4,000 or $5,000, and I'd just be sitting there fantasizing about getting to have that. But this particular time, whatever magazine it was, I'll probably never figure out what it was, but it was an issue of a computer magazine where they had a preview of what was called Windows Longhorn, which was the code name for Windows Vista, which, at that point didn't come out finally for another like 5 years or whatever. Um, but that was the feature article, but an article they had in it was for a little known game that wouldn't come out for another 5 years either, known at the time as Stalker Oblivion Lost. And that was actually my first exposure to the game Stalker, and I started following its development for years. Um, but I was already reading computer magazines and this and that, and I was hyped for Doom 3 at a point, and all the dynamic shadow volume and this that unified lighting shit. And at a point, I was probably like 13. I found the John Carmack QuakeCon keynote speeches. This was like 2004, and I'm listening to him talk about all the graphics technology stuff. And as I mentioned before, with like the architectural stuff, medical stuff, whatever it is, like part of my interest in certain things is just, a byproduct of the word stuff, linguistic stuff. I just think words are cool. And I'm just sitting here saying shit that I like at that moment. I have no clue what he's talking about, but it sounds awesome. Um, it's like when I was a kid, I had encyclopedias, and I remember there was a part, it was like about Einstein, and it showed, like E equals MC squared and all that shit. And like I had no clue what it meant, but it looked cool. So I started writing my own like fake equations, not really understanding what it was supposed to be about, but I just thought it looked cool. It was shit like that. I was fascinated by the sound of the words, and that was when I started to learn about computer graphics shit as well. So when I was 13 years old, I started reading siggraph papers, listening to his keynotes, researching anything I could on graphics. And, of course, at first having no clue what the fuck I was reading, but I sort of just, dove in the deep end and just learned how to swim, right? And it's been something that I've been hugely interested in ever since. And, also pretty early with like video compression, like speaking of Doom 3, where my first kind of introduction to video compression was, it was like 2005. And of course, I was trying to record Doom 3. And I believe I was just using Virtual Dub because it had a way that you could capture the window or the desktop or whatever. But it was a huge file. And it's 2005. I didn't exactly have the hugest hard drive on earth at the time. So the uncompressed video took up a lot of space. So that was when I got, exposed to the idea of compressing videos, like using Virtual Dub to do that. Um, and then I learned about like fraps, like recording stuff with fraps or this or that. Or actually, maybe that's what it was. I had found fraps. The files were so big, and then like that I learned about Virtual Dub as a way to compress stuff. But like, so 14 years old, I was already like huge into video compression type shit, image processing type shit. And I don't know, I've just always loved that technical stuff. I just thought it was cool. And, learning about, all these different technical topics, like a big part of it is just the little like terminology jargon stuff. It's just interesting, just the word. I don't know, I just think words are cool. You know, like I have a, pretty strong interest in linguistics, and, you know, where I've been more on the topic recently of level design or like architectural related shit, I've been looking more for actual architectural references because I've been trying to replicate some of the stuff I've seen that looks pretty cool, like, oh, that staircase or whatever, and having to refresh myself on the terminology. So, like, where I read that one post I made, probably 2/3 of the words I used there were words that um, I either didn't know already or had forgotten. But it's one of those things like, dude, even on the topics I'm an expert on, like computer repair or like video compression type stuff, or like for example, I edit my videos with a scripting language because that's the type of turbo nerd I am. Well, even with that shit, which I've been doing for 20 years, I don't ever remember the exact syntax or the parameters for this or that function. I have scripts that I wrote that I, repurpose every time. So if I ever want to do something different, I'll have to like go to the wiki page and refresh myself on what are the parameters that I need to use or this or that. And with that specifically, it can kind of suck because the different functions, like essentially the same parameter for different functions, can actually have different names, which is fucking annoying. But um, even the stuff that I've spent the most time thinking about, yeah, like I love words, just as a concept. But I'm pretty bad at remembering, either like the names of individuals or just, the terms for different stuff, even with shit that I'm basically an expert in, right? Like, there's a lot of that stuff, video compression and shit like that. It's like the only individuals that are above me at that point are the motherfuckers that wrote the programs that I use, right? And it's like I don't ever even remember specific terms half the fucking time. But, you know, there's lots of different stuff that, as I had mentioned, and kind of I had reinforced for myself when I was watching that Romanian dude stuff a minute ago. Um, there's different architectural terminologies that it's like now that I either know or remember what the word is, I notice it better, and it helps me more like quickly recognize sort of like the simplicity and the complexity, if that makes sense, right? So, like, if you're artistically minded, you're probably aware of how you can pretty much decompose everything to basic shapes or primitives or whatever you want to call it. So, like, a lot of the building design stuff that guy was showing, I was like, I don't even necessarily have to, like, be fully acquainted with this architectural style to just really quick brush this out and hammer. Because it's essentially like a few cubes, and there, it's like a trapezoidal kind of thing, and here's a couple triangles. Like it's not going to be super detailed, but I could really quickly block out the overall shape and design of that type of architectural style, right? But there was something else. Like one of the things I read yesterday was like this one architectural thing called dentils, and so it's just dentil, like like dentist. Basically the word for teeth because they sort of look like little teeth. If you've ever used wall textures, like brick wall textures and all that have trims on them, like in Half-Life 2 and all that, you've seen these before. There's a little square thingies that go all the way across the top of part of the trim, and it's a decorative thing. But yeah, that's the name of those dentils. And funny enough, there's a terminology in video encoding where interlacing scan lines can be visible on a essentially progressive video frame that are called uh, mouse teeth, because the visual artifact can vaguely look like tiny teeth, like of a small animal like a mouse or something. So they have all that. I love how all these terms are like, they're derived of metaphorical usages, but at the same time they're kind of more literal than you might expect them to be. So like those dentils, which is an architectural greeble, they vaguely look like just a long row of teeth, pretty much, and like they're distinct, pretty much, and I mean maybe this isn't an exact definition. I haven't looked this up yet, but intuitively, visually, I would say that the main difference between dentils and like cornices or whatever the name is for the other thing is that the dentils are just like purely decorative, whereas the other thing, that they're larger and they're actually meant to support, the roof or like this or that. But yeah, I don't know. I always love the terminology aspects of that, because you would be surprised like how much actually goes into structural design. Um, even like I beams or H beams, it's like they're designed to flex predominantly in one particular axis. So which way they're positioned actually matters. And a lot of times you don't actually see video games account for that. They just slap a, I-beam texture or truss texture on shit, right? But like I'm so literal about it. I'm so hyper literal that when I make it, I'll actually model it out with the brushwork, the actual I-beam shape. And even on like the floor plate, the base plate or like the gusset plates, like I'll actually model the actual nuts and bolts on it. Which if they're really big, you can use the normal grid scale, but a lot of times I'll, kind of break the rules and use micro geometry. I should maybe do something like that just real quickly. I mean, I think I've got a old version of like, I think it's like 3ds Max 9 or whatever it was I have somewhere, if that would even work on modern Windows. Something like that would be pretty easy to make real quick. Have a, it's kind of like nut and bolt type of model that is just like one grid unit. And I could just place a bunch of those on like the base plates or like whatever of like girders. But yeah, shit like that even, like gusset plate. You've seen them a trillion times in a video game, right? Like one of the best examples is the underside of the bridge part of Half-Life 2, right? Those they're that weird sort of kind of like trapezoid kind of shape thing. You see them all over the place, but it's like knowing the name for them, like these different architectural things, makes it easier to notice them, and I feel like it helps you build a better kind of quick, intuitive, like visual understanding of how stuff works. Like, I used to be obsessed with making construction area type stuff for, based off a lot of different games and other shit. Like Max Payne 2, the construction site is actually pretty realistic. But like I used to make my own shit like that. Like a lot of times when I make buildings, I'll I'll build them how like an actual construction thing would be. Like I'll like create the foundation and this and that stuff. And one of the things I used to do a lot was make the half built building where like the main structure was there, but you had like the framing that had only been partially drywalled. And I would even create my own custom textures for the drywall so that, the shit they spread on it, I forget, to like cover the joints and like the like screw holes or whatever. Um, I made different versions of the textures to fit different kind of overall shapes that you might see in certain kind of complex framing that might get drywalled like on staircases and shit. And I was like, one of the maps I found from 2008, when I was like 17, it was already kind of ridiculously overbuilt like that, right? Just a little tiny little brick wall building, kind of like you would see in Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl, but I had like built out all of the framing of like the roof and like the supported beams and all that shit. I don't know, I've just always found shit like that really fascinating.